Okay. Just gotta know Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this session of the Stayton City Council for Monday, the 4th of March in the year 2019. Since we're all here that need to be so far, let's all rise and have a flag salute, please. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Let's see. The staff is here. Council's here. Any additions to the agenda? I don't hear any. Declaration of ex-party contact, conflicts of interest, bias. Okay. Presentations, comments from the public. I don't have any green slips tonight. We're gonna miss that. We've got three confident-looking gentlemen sitting back there. Probably came to excoriate us. I think that's the word. Excoriate? Tear us up. Anyway, okay. Consent agenda for February 19th, 2019. Everyone had a chance to look at that? And what would you folks like to do with that?
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
I'll offer a motion to approve the consent agenda as submitted.
Okay.
I second.
Motion? Is there a second? And a second. Councilor Ort. Let's look. All in favor, say aye, please.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. Appreciate that. All right. So, no public hearings, unfinished business, appointment of council liaison, staff report, Mr. Campbell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is bringing back forward an item that we had first brought to the council on February 4th. What is proposed before you is something that actually the mayor and I had worked on and having discussion about the council liaison position. So we had made a broader proposal recommending changing how we did council liaisons and looking at areas, broader areas of focus. So what we looked at was economic development, governmental agencies, public safety, fire department, community relations, and city projects. And at the last February 4th council meeting, there was discussions asking staff to come forward and to talk about the items that would be responsible for each one, meetings that may need to be attended, other obligations that may come from this. So staff, we all talked about this and discussed this, and the challenge really is some of these areas could in theory have quite a few meetings. Rich with public safety has numerous meetings that could be germane to this, but what we really wanted to focus on was not so much some of those rote meetings or that. It was more to provide a broader scope, broader spectrum, so that if things did come up, for instance, as we have conversations about Detroit Dam, we could, have a council member who we can have a little more versed and to spend a little more time with, or if there was meetings that we needed to have where it would be important to have a council member present, that we could do that. So I've detailed this in my staff report, and we'd be happy to answer any questions and would be open to any discussion you have on the proposal and what you'd like to do. So with that, Mr. Mayor, I'll turn it over to the council.
Thank you. Thank you, Keith. Has everyone had a chance to look through that proposal? It really arose out of it started with a request. One group in the community wanted a liaison for them. And I thought, well, it's a reasonable request, maybe, but why tie down one person with one group? They would become I think the intent was for that person to become a sort of advocate for that group. Now, this could have been the library, the swimming pool, whatever. So that started the discussions between at least, well, Dan was in on the preliminary discussions of this too. And Keith and I thought, maybe we should just expand, as Keith said, expand the roles here. It can look like a lot of new work, doesn't have to be, but maybe a way for us to better stay in touch with the community. So that's where it's at. This could turn into kind of a free-for-all as three of you want the same area, but maybe not. So if you've had a chance to look at these areas and see something that's kind of interesting, something you might like to get involved with, if I had a motion to appoint members of the governing body to the following positions, we just jump in. So what do you folks want to do?
Mr. Mayor.
Or maybe this isn't important. I don't, it's up to you folks. Go ahead.
Thank you. Keith, I think for me, what I had gotten out of the meeting when we discussed you guys taking this back was that we were asking that we just wanted a better idea of what meetings would fall under the category, so we had a better idea of what we might be interested in getting involved in. I get that some of them are very self-explanatory, but other ones we may not even know what is out there for meetings that we're involved in for membership or participation. So while I love these categories, I think they're great, I was really hoping to have some more insight into what was under each of these.
Well, I think the challenge, and I understand your concern, the challenge we had as we talked to staff and kind of put this back on staff was, really saying what would come and even being able to predict what would happen in the future, for instance, in some of these, and part of the idea behind this is that as opportunities arise, or there's discussions that occur, or as just the natural dynamics happen, that we would have someone that we would know we could go to and say, this is in kind of your area and this is what we would want to do. And there's a lot of things with public safety that would not be something, and again, I think, Rich, your list you sent had 12 meetings maybe on there or something of that nature, but the reality is maybe what would be more important is as we talk about maybe some grants that we're going after for public safety, or even the Metcom issue, which is one we haven't had a lot of public discussions about, but is a system that's used to communicate with officers, and it's a bigger political issue and a challenging issue that's facing a lot of government agencies to have some input and some direction from council on some of the things, or just to make you aware of what some of the challenges we're facing are. And so the idea was to create some of this. It became really challenging to say, for instance, with city projects, we're going to bring ideas that we came out of our goals, but right now, until some of those are approved, we really can't say when they'll occur or how much effort will go into them, and so this is where we really had a challenge of saying, okay, how do we define what some of these are? In community relations, there'd be no meetings per se, but what we want to talk about is other ideas that we have in terms of outreach, community outreach. Another city survey would be an idea, so working on how we convey that and message that. So that'd be working maybe more with staff, and even maybe working with some other local agencies or groups in terms of cross-communication and community relations. And so, but to say there would be a meeting that would be directly tied to this, there never really would be, but it's not saying there wouldn't be a lot of engagement and involvement and opportunity to really get feedback and figure out ways to communicate with the public. So that was kind of the challenge as we talked with the staff, and what brought us kind of say, okay, maybe we didn't quite explain this as well as we could have, and here's what the intent was.
Mr. Mayor.
Well, here's one, real quick. This new neighborhood thing that we're putting together, this advisory group, I think that'd fit under city projects. And that would be one that should be, whoever wanted to jump in on this, to just actually jumpstart this thing. So there's one.
And I think there'd be opportunities where several of these could in theory fall under multiple areas, and so it'd be a case of, okay, is there somebody, here's the idea, it would fall under economic development or government agencies, maybe it's a regional solutions program, right, that could help with economic development. That's also working with another governmental agency. Here are the two council members, would one of you have particular interest in this, or would both of you have interest in something that could have a lot of value?
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
So Keith, I see where you guys may have had a difficulty of kind of outlining it, and maybe you wouldn't want to put that into a document such as this, but I think the point was so that we had a better idea to make a thoughtful decision of where we could be most effective. And as what the mayor has just kind of brought to my attention is, how are we to know what meetings fall under what categories, including that neighborhood one, and how does that neighborhood group know who their single point of contact on the council would be? It seems like it may create a little bit of confusion instead of like security knowing that they can go to this certain council person to be that quote expert.
I think, as you all know, people aren't going to be afraid to contact you in the public if they want something. It would be more just us trying to, as a staff, be more cognitive and aware, and to make the individual aware who would be part of this conversation. My concern and our concern as we started to do this, and as staff started to provide this information to me, I really, as we had the conversations, I just was afraid to say, here's everything that could be germane, but you may never deal with any of this, right? This may not be anything that has anything to do with what's going on or happening. Public safety being, a pretty prime example of that. So I think that would be the challenge, and that's what as we started to try to kind of put together what you wanted, said, okay, maybe we really need to talk about, this isn't the idea, and really the staff really struggled with coming back to me and saying, this is where everything would be under this, because like public safety, there could be issues that we're not even aware of at this point, but that may come critical at another time. Economic development is the same thing. We had received a notification from an organization recently about grant proposals with that, but that's not something we could have talked about before, but put on the radar of something that we were aware of. It's something that literally just came a day or two ago. So we can definitely try if that's the wish of the council. I guess the concern would be, it may look lopsided, and I can be concerned a little bit about pigeonholing some of these when really the idea behind some of this would be flexibility.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
So, specifically with the community relations one, so you're saying that there really aren't any meetings that you can think of that would fall under that. Obviously, something that arises, could say, hey, you need to talk to so-and-so, they are, with community relations, and that would apply to them. But can you give me an idea of, like, an example of what that specific, and I think maybe this is where you're going with it, what is, since there aren't any meetings or anything, like, what does this specific job entail? Like, when you say community relations, you're talking about social media, newsletters, but what are the expectations of that person in terms of what are they doing?
I think one of the challenges that's been brought is, how do we convey our message and how do we communicate with the public at large, and what are some other opportunities and ways that we can do that, and how can we continue to improve with some of these issues. And another one would be community surveys. We've done a city survey and a business survey in the past, so helping implement that and work on the questions and the outreach. And there's challenges anytime you do something like this. I mean, social media is good for a certain group, newsletters are good for a different group, but there's always ways and outreaches that we're constantly dealing with. How do we communicate with all? The Spanish community is one that has recently come up as a possibility of how do we reach out more to that organization. So, working on having a council member that could help the city and maybe foster some of those relationships would be what would happen. I had another local organization come to me and ask about partnering in terms of sharing joint communications and using our platform. So having a conversation with what that would look like and how that would happen. It has been an idea that's been expressed of a value you'd like to see. So this is an idea of giving some input from a city council member who could then do that and help staff as we look to continuously try to improve these areas. But to say there would be a specific meeting, no, other than with that organization that asked to maybe meet and talk about ideas and wanted feedback on how we do our social media platform as well. So
one of these in the middle there is pretty specific, and that's the fire department. And I put that in because I'd like to be able to try to forge a better relationship with our fire department. It's out there as it's an autonomous unit, but we could be working together better than we do. And I'd like to take on that, unless somebody else feels closer to those volunteers.
Mr. Mayor, are we
Yes.
specifically making the actual appointments to the individual tracks, we'll call them, tonight? Or are we just motioning
if you
to
folks-
revise
If you folks,
what the current policy is going to be on these different tracks that are assigned to council members?
well, it's not, I didn't see it as an assignment. I thought it maybe as if you found something interesting, and for instance, agency, local, county, we're in negotiations on all kinds of things with the county. Dan, how many master plans are we working on at any one time?
At the moment, we're working just on the transportation system plan.
Okay, but there are more out there, and we always find a reason to up-to-date or review one. And so it's kind of a constant challenge, isn't it?
It is. I mean, most all of our master plans, except for actually now the stormwater master plan is more than 10 years old, so,
Okay.
and the others are 15.
Yeah. So there's one.
So, Mr. Mayor, if I
Yes.
may, as the council, or the other members of this council, are we resolved to formalize this in the way that it is before us right here in the example of the motion? And if it is, then let's just discuss on who wants to take each specific tract on, right? Kind of seems like the natural next step.
Mr. Mayor, we already did that, though. We already changed these.
Oh, okay,
So that was your earlier question. So we've already changed these, and so it would be to decide who's going to do what, basically.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
I might. To give you guys an idea of how I saw this, traditional role of the liaison in the past has always been specific to a board, specific to a referral, a project. For example, they had a liaison for the Parks Board. They had a liaison for the Library Board. And I think in doing that, there really was an exclusion to the folks that the items that fell into these items, who do they go to when there isn't something for an option that? And I think that's what Keith's trying to do here, is trying to have that umbrella expanded, so in the event that something does come up where the liaison's needed, then we fill the need. So that's my 2 cents.
And there definitely is, there's power of having, we can talk to like a government agency sometimes until we're blue in the face about something, but there's the power of the support of the council member, right? And a council member or a mayor sitting in a meeting adds the gravitas that sometimes we just don't have. And even as we try to formulate, I know Lance has been working really hard about partnerships with Marion County, the mill and overlay if we have those meetings, we have the opportunity to take a council member along to say, yeah, we as a council support this and it benefits us. It adds something just beyond feeling that we're doing something that isn't a broader support of what we're supposed to be doing. So that's kind of one of the hopes that we're having here is as these opportunities come forward, we can do that and have some of that extra additional support in some of these projects.
Mr. Mayor.
Yes, go ahead.
So I really appreciate the way that this has changed. I I like the idea of having a larger umbrella for things to fall under, but at the same time, when I'm taking a new position on for work, I want to see kind of a position description. I want to know what I'm getting into, what may be in there, and there's always that place at the end that's other duties as assigned. And so that leaves that opening for there may be new groups, there may be things that change, groups may not need you at all, but just having that guidance of where can I be most effective? Because there's a lot of these groups where I have interest, but I want to be able to make that decision or at least put my name forward to the group that I feel I can be most effective in. And so I think that, for me, is what I thought that we were asking you to do, is to give us kind of an idea or an unofficial description of what could fall under here, so that we could have a little bit more structure and kind of like a scope of work of where you may be asked to help, knowing that things are going to arise that couldn't be accounted for. I don't feel like it was asking a lot to have something in front of us tonight for us to look at.
More specific? Is that-
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, we could definitely try. I mean, that's the direction. I guess that we brought this back saying, as a staff, we looked at this and just didn't feel like we could accomplish this or make it seem like a meaningful, and to try to cover the unknown unknowns was the concern that we had. I mean, we tried to make these broad enough in terms of economic development, government agencies, public safety, community relations, and city projects, just to kind of say, here's the broad scope of what they may fall under. And obviously staff can hear this, and we can sit down again and try to pencil out what we think it would be. But knowing that the idea behind this is it's going to be pretty dynamic, and the things we may talk about may never actually come up. There's a lot of, go back to Rich's public safety, there's a lot of public safety meetings that just would never have something that would be of interest to the city council. Most of the meetings that Lance would have on waterways wouldn't necessarily come up unless there was an issue like Detroit. In terms of government agencies, I could talk about the meetings I go to as well, but 99% of the time there just would be no need to have somebody there, because you're talking about materials that aren't really part of your goals, objectives, or a larger, I guess I would say agency issue, right? It's just the typical issues that we deal with or discussions that we have. And so, I don't know how to quantify, but here's what's under governmental agencies, but I don't know, what would actually, how often this would come up, or what specifically would happen out of that. I mean, we could talk about some of the goals, but I would hate to narrow it down so far that we're kind of back in the same position where we don't have some of that broader umbrella of flexibility.
Well, that was the idea, to put, I guess, put our feet on more streets in a sense. But if it's too general, then maybe that doesn't work either.
Mr. Mayor,
ahead.
Keith had just brought up, you brought up the Detroit Dam issue. So for me, I can see that falling under two groups, like just right off, initial thought. So, if I'm very interested in working on that, my question is, where would you see that falling under the most, even though it could hit more than one?
I think we said earlier, I think there's times where these could definitely fall under multiple issues, right? And at that point, you can reach out to both council members to say, here's the Detroit Dam. Do you want to call that governmental agencies? Because we're dealing with other government agencies in terms of trying to deal with that. And you could say this has an impact on economic development as well. I guess you could make an argument there's a public safety aspect of it in terms of providing water, but which one of you would have a stronger interest in this project and assign it that way, right? Because there are going to be things that wouldn't necessarily just hit one, but the idea is that we would have someone to go to be able to say, or even multiple people say, okay, this is the issue. Are one of you more interested, or would like to take, or would both of you like to take part of this? Maybe it's important enough that more than one council member is.
And so how do I know that you're going to reach out to me that I'm going to be one of those 2 counselors that you decide to reach out to by which one of these I choose. If I really am interested in this certain topic, how do I know that if I choose this one group, that when you say, okay, there's an issue, that I'm going to be one of those 2 or 3 people that you reach out to?
I think the issue that we've had, you're thinking this the wrong way. The issue we've had in the past isn't that we're trying to figure out who to go to. There was no one to go to, right? So the idea behind this is when issues arise, that we have a list to go to and say, here's a logical person to include and be part of this. There has been a challenge in the past, and honestly, sometimes it's just been the council member who had the most flexibility to go to a meeting. So the idea of how do I know you're going to? Well, in the past, as you look at the list that was here, 99% of the things we did didn't touch on any of these issues, right? I mean, the Parks and Recreation Board, if you're a liaison to that, it's not touching any of the other issues. We didn't have anybody to go to or to talk to, right? It was a general thing with the council, or who do we think might be able to come. So the idea behind this is just what you're saying, is as these situations arise, as we want somebody to be more aware of some of these issues, staff would have somebody to go to, or multiple people to go to, and say, hey, this is the issue, or one of you available to come help us, or to be part of this, or to be part of the bigger discussion.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, go ahead.
There are some knowns that we have, though. Like, there are some known groups that we have. There's some known issues that we have. My thought wasn't that I expected you guys to be able to come up with every single issue that you ever think could happen to Stayton. Just that we have certain issues that are hot now. We have certain groups that are active now. And I don't feel like I'm thinking about it the wrong way. I feel like maybe we aren't on the same communication wavelength at this point of what I was envisioning and what you as the city were envisioning. And so my apologies for maybe not being clear at the last meeting when we spoke about this. And I want to make sure that I am clear to say that I do really like the change. I do agree wholeheartedly that what I see here now is much better than what was there before. This is a massive improvement, and I really think it's great. I just wanted a little more guidance for myself. I can't speak on behalf of the other counselors, but for myself to know, where I would fit the best.
Well, and the other challenge we're facing as a staff is we've never done it this way before, right? Mm-hmm. So again, I think part of this is going to have some expectation and some flexibility that as we go along, and maybe as we do this next year, we can make the changes. This is something we wanted to try out and see if it worked, and we can like anything as we go along, make adjustments and talk about whatever changes we had. But I think it's going to be really challenging to say, here's what you should expect if you're a part of economic development, or here's what you should expect as part of governmental agencies. I can think of last year, one of the challenges we had was, and we have 2 people from the audience, the jail. That was an issue with a governmental agency in terms of a citizen who, we were surprised by some of the issues regarding the jail. And so, that becomes something that just pops up in public safety that we wouldn't necessarily be able to anticipate. It became a pretty big issue. The mayor and myself were going to hearings, and Rich was going to hearings. So this is, when we say, this is a challenge that we started thinking about, this is the challenge we're facing of saying, we try to do these broad areas, but I don't know how to, and we can try, but staff, has heard the direction as well, and we can see what we can come up with. I'm just not sure how we can be more specific than what we kind of are here.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, go ahead.
So the groups that we had previously, if you're going down the list and you say, okay, the school board, the Parks and Recs, library, regional transportation, if you go down, like even these that are here, I know that some of them don't even meet or disbanded or whatnot, but to Paige's point, I don't really know myself where the school board would fall under in these categories I mean, I would guess that it would fall under government agencies, but I wouldn't specifically know that, so I can see where Paige is saying, okay, just kind of an idea of what is economic development. Are you talking, I mean, does that cover RDS? Is that like SEDCOR? Is that, I guess, some potentials, like you may be involved in discussions about this, or, you know, the governmental agencies, does that cover the commissioner's breakfast or the Parks and Rec board, or even the library board? Like, where does that kind of fit? I get what you're saying. You don't want to pigeonhole it. I totally understand that, but I can kind of see where there is some ambiguity in it, and maybe a little bit too much. I know that you want to make it a little vague, but maybe a little too vague. Some examples.
Well, I mean, I think one of the issues here you're facing is we're talking about 501c3 charities that are operating in the city right now. I think, Dan, off the top of my head, I can think of a dozen, maybe more, 15, 16. I mean, without sitting here and doing that, you know, without, and again, it's not something we would deal with the North St. Anne School District, you know, unless there's a need to have, you know, some sort of direct involvement with that. I don't know, and that was kind of the concern we had here. What's the point of going to a North St. Anne School Board meeting if there's nothing that is germane to anything in relationship to the city? Now, if you want to say it's important for economic development because one of the key factors in economic development is great schools, we could, I mean, you could look at it as a governmental agency. It's another governmental agency, and it's a relationship we're trying to build. If we have a group project or a joint project on something like that, we can. But yeah, in terms of economic development, Regional Solutions would be somebody we'd work with, but I haven't had a meeting with them in 6 months. You know, Library Board, Friends of the Library Foundation would all fit under the Friends of the Pool. But again, I can't think of a time recently. Other, you know, Brews, Bites, and Books would be, you know, maybe a joint project on something like that. But the Friends of the Library, Spaghetti Feed.
Does that fit under, like, where does that fit? Like, what person would that be under?
In terms of I think you could look at it several ways. Community relations would be the one that I would think. Some of those could potentially fall under that if you want to look at that. If you want to look at those as, you know, they're not governmental agencies, but I think, you know, we could have the discussion on some of these as they come up and say, all right, where do we need to go? But, you know, the concern is if we're trying to spend time and staff, I'm more than welcome to let you guys speak because we talked about this as well.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes, go ahead.
I've been on several of these meetings or whatnot, and I was solicited as an at-large member of the council, and I was contacted to see if I would be willing to serve in that capacity. Why don't we just have 5 at-large members on the council with 6 of these umbrellas? It solves the problem. And each individual department head or Keith can say, here's what's on the topic today, and send a note out or blast it and see who wants to go to it.
Who wants to deal with this one? Okay. Okay. That has possibilities. There's one group, I don't know, I guess I'm going to go ahead and name them.
I don't think you should, Mr. Mayor. I mean, I think the concern, you know, what we have is you have a council member dedicated to one specific group. It gives them a lot of power and influence when there's other groups doing good work, and I just mentioned quite a few of them who don't have a council member representing what they're doing in the city as well.
Okay.
And so, I mean, that becomes the concern of these organizations who want somebody specifically for whatever reason it may be, and not recognizing the other groups. The Friends of the Pool make significant donations to the pool and the fundraising. Friends of the Library being another one. You have the food bank. You have the Historical Society. I think there's 2 historical societies that are all active and interested in what's going on in the city. So.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
So my first question is it possible to send this back? Because I think that there's a way that we can cut this up where it makes more sense. My recommendation, I think, and I'm not speaking for any other council members, but I think where the confusion is the bleed over, and that some of it is generic enough that it encompasses so many other areas, like government agencies, could be public safety, economic development. My recommendation would be, I like the idea of having the broader topics, but maybe base them on function versus entity. So, economic development, education, and I don't know what those specific ones would be, but transportation could be one, public safety would be one. So at least there's some clearer separation of those. That would be my recommendation. And I also can imagine that there is some other city that's done this that you could use as a template.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
I think that kind of goes up against what Keith was talking about. The problem being with defining these is then you're left out in the cold if you don't know which council member to approach with an issue. And so I think a good idea would be maybe some sort of hybrid between what Councilman Quigley is talking about and councilors over here, and perhaps maybe what we can do is just a general broad strokes of, hey, council member X, who's currently serving the capacity as the economic development liaison, we're looking to reach out to you for this particular issue, and then courtesy copying all the councilors. That way they know they can reach out to Keith if there's some issue that they would like to have input on or something along the nature of that.
Well, I'm suggesting that we do have primaries for those functional areas. I'm just saying that the areas themselves should have a clearer separation, but that we still assign people to them, and that there would still be bleed over.
Right.
But at least it would be a clearer definition, because I think that there's a couple on here that are causing the confusion. Like, to me, economic development's pretty clear. Public safety, that's pretty clear. Even community relations, I think, is pretty clear. But city projects and governmental agencies, those are really, really super broad that encompass economic development, public safety, and community relations. You see what I'm saying? I think that there's just a way that we could clear those up, still have people assigned to them, and, courtesy copy other members, still have bleed over, and still have them broad.
I mean, part of the idea with some of this is, if we included you on everything that was going on as courtesy copies, I could probably send you each 5 emails, 6 emails per day. I mean, I think that becomes the concern at that point. Why designate anybody? Let's just, here's everything. I mean, here's everything. And then it becomes almost a concern that everything sort of gets buried in some of the conversations, and even some of the political conversations like Metcom, and maybe I shouldn't be bringing that up, Rich, and I'm sorry if I shouldn't be, but, we'll start detailing everything that's going on with Metcom right now, so everybody's aware. And,
Yeah, I know.
And I mean, that's the concern we had with trying to, to try to have somebody that could be more of a direct contact on this and the point of contact, so we could have,
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
Let's do it this way, or let me try this for a minute. Paige, what's your interest?
Well, okay.
I'm
I
serious.
think we
I'm
all
serious
know
here.
that my interest lies strongly in affordable housing, but I do want to just real fast speak to the point of the courtesy copying people, the carbon copying them. I've worked in capacities where if there's a director, they're getting courtesy copied on everything. They know they don't have to read everything unless they're in that 2-line. If they're in the 2-line, they know they need to read it. If they're in the courtesy copy, they know that they can look at the headline, maybe the first sentence, and go, this doesn't really interest me, or they'll send me an email directly with just me if they want to get my attention. And that's fairly common practice from what I've seen, because you get hundreds of emails a day through your inbox. So I don't really see the issue for me, and I won't speak for everyone, of getting a lot of emails. I just know that if you courtesy copy me, I may not read the entire thing because it's not directed to me. It's just kind of a FYI. If you hear something, open this.
Try again, Brian.
Yeah, it's okay.
No,
What I was trying to get at is I want to see where that would fall under one of these.
Yeah, and I don't know where affordable housing would fall under here. That's where I've been
So,
puzzled.
It could fall under a
Or
various.
ADA requirements,
It could fall under various of these umbrellas. I mean, this is what we're doing here is a city project, right?
which I'm very interested in. I think is
Right.
great. Where does that fall? I want to be in that.
I think that's the thing. We're going to have so many issues come up that you just, where do you draw the line? What do you classify it as? What compartment do you put it in?
How do I make sure I get the email? That's my question. How do I make sure I'm in that?
In the loop. Well, what would you like to do with it, folks? I guess we can sit on it some more and try to narrow it down, and we need ways to communicate with this community, though. Not all of them
Yes.
watch this, thank goodness. But we need to try something. So, where would you like to be?
Mr. Mayor, I feel like with every good work product, it goes through drafts. Sometimes things are fluid, and even with whatever we come up with, just knowing that it is a fluid, living type document that's going to change and be updated. I personally would like to see this go back with a little bit more detail so that we can make, again, thoughtful decisions on where we can be most effective. So that's what I would like to see. I would also like, to move on this, but at this point, I just don't know where I would say, hey, I want to be this liaison. I don't have that information for me to make a decision that I feel is a well thought out decision.
Mr. Mayor.
All right, thank you. Question, other possibilities? Go ahead.
The goal of all of this is for the staff to figure out how to best serve the council. You can say, take this back. We can discuss this more as a staff. I don't know how we succeed from here. I don't know where we go from here. I don't know how we answer the questions that you want. I'm not trying to be pugnacious. I'm just saying, this is something we've talked about and worked on. And I wrote my memo kind of saying, here's the challenge of what we're facing. And I don't know how I meet your expectation. I sincerely don't. And I'm open to conversations of how we do that, but trying to explain, I don't know how we're not on the same wavelength here, but I don't know where to go from here. And I'm open for ideas, but honestly, I'd rather just scrap this and try to come up with something else at this point, because I don't know how we succeed in what you're wanting.
Mr. Mayor, I think that it may be helpful hearing what Keith is saying, that he kind of feels like he's stumped here at this point on how to help us understand this. Perhaps we as a council should discuss with some of the city staff, maybe in a work session or something where we can kind of narrow this down and have that time for the communication instead of here at the dais.
One of the things that's, I don't know if it helps, I hope it does, the old liaisons, people would go to library board meetings and people would go to parks board meetings, and the staff people were also there, of course. They would make reports about what happened in a parks meeting, in a library board meeting. It really wasn't very much for a liaison person to do. They'd go to a meeting once a month. Oh, okay, yeah, that's what they said. Yeah. Janice having a book sale. But it really wasn't very productive. Something has to be hopefully more productive than what we used to do. So.
Well, staff, I'll meet with staff and we'll figure out what the path forward is and bring a suggestion forward. I think that's what we can do at this point.
If anyone else can and wants to see how we interact with the county, next Tuesday, right? The 12th?
Well, and I think, one of the things that I think gets lost in this too is, I asked about the breakfast. I don't think there's any expectation that you couldn't still attend whatever you wanted to attend, right? It isn't going to pigeonhole you into, the goal isn't to say you can't be involved in something, right? The goal really is to say, we as a staff would like, as we have these issues to come up, to have a council member that, if we're going to have a liaison that can have a more meaningful conversation and dialogue and maybe get into the weeds a little bit more and have somebody that would have kind of additional information and knowledge on some of these topics, or even providing, like I said, that gravitas that comes with a council member being engaged and involved in that. I would never say you can't go to this meeting or go to that because it's not part of your thing. All we're trying to do is to give us more flexibility, because Hank's right. You would go to the library board meeting, but no offense, Jana, most of the time nothing interesting or valuable or part of your goal is, and I love the library and she knows that.
Those are
Come from that meeting, if you want to go to the community breakfast,
Those
if
are
you
just
want to,
nothing meetings, yeah.
as we talk about some of these other meetings that are occurring out there, I've been sharing with you, if anybody wants to show up. Lance and I were at the Detroit buyout meeting. It was Willamette, whenever that was, Lance, a week ago. We included you on those. If you want to show up, you're more than welcome to show up. I mean, I'm not trying to discourage you from hearing the same exciting stuff we're hearing. But more it's a case of when these issues come up, or for instance, when SEDCOR sends an economic development opportunity, to have somebody, as we're working on grants, to maybe help staff or just be knowledge of what's going on so that you're an advocate. That's what I would really like to see this become. But of course, you can go to all the breakfasts you want on Tuesdays. The mayor loves them, so you can chat with him about how much he likes it, and any other thing that's happening in the community that you have an interest in. Anybody's always welcome to come. It's not a matter of you're pigeonholed.
One of the commissioners is really excited and has been most of his adult life about garbage. And so you get the inside dope on Marion County garbage. Well, it's interesting. It's money. It's a lot of money. And once in a while we get an award for having the least trash in our recyclables. Not $2,500, just a pittance, but still, everything helps. Go ahead, please. I hear
Yes,
it.
thank you. So I'm hearing the needs of the city staff, and I want to support the city staff. I think you guys do great work. I feel like I'm also expressing some needs that that I feel that I would need met in order to not only be that person that you guys are asking for by being interested in, I'm interested in a lot of things, but I have some passions that I'm more interested in, and that I would be more effective if I was kind of the person that was the go-to for that, and that also serves the community the best way too, by figuring out which one of us can fit in these areas the best is all. It's not that we're going to be excluded from everything. It's not that we can't go to a breakfast. It's not that we have to go to a library meeting or a fire department meeting. It's the best way to support not only the city staff but also the residents and keeping us engaged in these subjects.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, go ahead, Jordan.
Councilor suggested a work session with the city staff because maybe we can hash out some ideas where the city staff is stumped. So what do we need to do to move that? Do I need to make a motion, or do we need to send it back, or?
I mean, I think it's more we can send it back, and we'll work with staff to see if based off the discussion tonight, if we can have some suggestions, and then we can go from there. If we need to do a work session, we can. I know some of our upcoming council meetings are pretty full, so we can work on trying to schedule a time if that's what the best interest. But maybe we can come together and have staff having been part of this conversation, and maybe some ideas can spring, and we can see if we can't hammer hammer it out without having to spend additional time. But if we need to spend additional time, we definitely can.
Should we do that? Just kind of start over?
My fear is that Keith has expressed that they are stumped and that they don't feel that they can do that, what we're asking. And so in order to support them, it almost feels like maybe that is where we should step in and collaborate together. And that is kind of the point of bringing up a work session, just, talking about what groups are out there, what issues are out there, even using some of the stuff that we talked about in the goal setting as kind of a guide, because we do have that, the goals, and where do those kind of fall, like percentage-wise, if you hit a 50% mark, that could fall under you.
And bring each of our interests to the table.
Sorry. Didn't mean to interrupt.
Go ahead, please.
Keith, how long has staff spent on, developing this essentially?
I mean, we talked at multiple staff meetings about it, and there were some individual conversations as well. So, we can take tonight and see if we can come up with something. We got some pretty smart people at the tables here, so hopefully we can come up with something that we can bring forward, and we can do it, informally, and see if that can be brought back at a future. And if not, we can have the goal set, or the call a special session for a work session.
Okay. Anything else?
Mr. Mayor,
Yes? Brian?
I think this should originate from the folks that wish to see it in a different form, because we're going to be right back to square one again on the next presentation.
Mr. Mayor, with respect,
Yes.
I agree with Councilor Quigley on that.
Okay. So is this a hopeless proposal?
Nothing's hopeless, Mr. Mayor.
No? Why not?
My point being, Mr. Mayor, is that bring the two things together and see if they mesh, and if they don't, they don't, and at least give it a try.
Okay. So, come back to the table. Counselor, you had a thought or a question or a comment?
Mr. May, you said that you were asking if this was hopeless, and I said no.
It isn't, okay, all right. Okay.
Wait, so I'm sorry, where are we leaving this? Because
Thank you.
Okay, we didn't,
We're going to just leave it for tonight.
because, okay.
Yeah, we can be done for tonight. Well, I'll
We're just
talk with
gonna
staff
leave it
tomorrow,
for
and
tonight.
I'll follow up with council, and
Okay.
we can come up with other solutions. If not, we'll work on trying to get a work session scheduled.
Well, we've spent most of an hour on that. Let's, to no conclusion, and sometimes that's what happens. Under new business, Economic Development Strategies Project, staff report and presentation, Mr. Fleischman and Alyssa of
Alyssa Piska of Bridge Economic
Piska,
Development
I
is what I think you're trying to read, Mr.
I have a
Mayor.
tough time with Irish names, and I just, okay, welcome. And Dan, go ahead with it, please.
Okay, very, very briefly, last fall, the city, or summer, the city put out a request for proposal for consulting services to help guide the city in creating economic development strategies. That was one of the goals of the previous council. We hired Alyssa with Bridge Economic Development to do that. She and her team have been hard at work. It's not last month anymore, it was late January. We held a series of 5, I think it was, roundtable discussions. One was with commercial brokers and property owners and businesses from the industrial area. One was with other governmental economic development partners. One focused on public works issues. One was with just community groups, and I can't remember. Oh, and the fifth was a general advisory committee that we've put together to help guide the process. So Alyssa is here tonight to really just to provide you with a summary of what she's done, the research she's put together on our status, and get some feedback from you on future progress. So with that.
Great. Well, good evening, Mayor and council members. Again, Alyssa Pishka with Bridge Economic Development, and it's been wonderful working with your community so far, and especially Dan and Lance. You guys have been great to work with. So what I want to do tonight is give you a brief overview of what we presented to many of those 5 stakeholder groups, give you a summary, and really get your feedback on this. The other thing that's coming up is we're going to start actively engaging in more broad community outreach. So we want you to be aware of what's going on. So when constituents are asking you about this economic development strategy, you are going to be well briefed, and you can engage them as well. So here's the quick agenda. We'll talk about project approach, what we want to achieve. Then what I like to do with a lot of our clients and communities is what do we consider economic development, which is what we call a traded industry cluster approach. Touch on some national regional trends. How are they affecting you and Stayton specifically? And what do we find out about Stayton? What are we hearing and what's the data showing? And then what are we going to be doing for community engagement? Okay, next slide. So, project approach. Okay, so what we want to be clear is we are leveraging much of the work you've already done. So we're going to build off regional work. I worked with Marion County on their economic development strategy. It was much smaller in scale, but we'll be using that work. We're working with the COG, Business Oregon, SEDCOR. We're not reinventing the wheel. What we're doing is figuring out how does Stayton fit in with this broader Salem region economy. So we'll be looking regionally, but really also honing in on Stayton-specific strengths. I think what's also really unique about this economic development strategy, and I really applaud your staff for doing this, is what is going on with the infrastructure specifically that could be or is showing to be a barrier to economic growth for your community. Not many communities do that. They look at strategy, but what we have been commissioned to do, which is great, is tell us what are the barriers. So that's one element of this. Then we will give you a strategy pertaining to vision, goals, and objections. And then one of my passions is actions. I spent 8 years in project management, commercial development. I spent 5 years managing economic development in Vancouver, Washington. And what I found is you need to hold one person responsible. So sometimes you'll see action plans that say, these 5 groups are going to take care of this action. When you do that, each group points to each other's group and nothing happens. So we're going to provide you with an action plan with a specific organization and a specific person in that organization that's responsible. And then the other element is private investment. So again, back to this infrastructure analysis, how do you strategically leverage your public dollars in infrastructure likely to bring private investment here? That is the end goal of economic development. Cities do not create jobs. You create great places where businesses create jobs. So that is why your end goal is private investment. Okay, next slide, please. So this is what we're talking about when we're talking about the proposed industrial area. So you're all probably familiar with this. This is home to Geldwin, Red Built. And there's about 100 acres remaining in this industrial area that cannot be developed at this point in time due to transportation constraints, stormwater constraints. And so what we'll be doing, you can see this is created by McKinsey. They are an engineering firm out of Portland, and they specialize in working with industrial users, knowing what is the size pipeline you need, what is maybe a regional storm facility you need. So we're going to come back and say, if you were to get this industrial area going, what are the regional bigger projects that are needed to move this forward? So that's what McKinsey is going to be focused on. The other element we'll just touch on, it's okay, you don't need to change it. The other thing I think that's going to be very interesting with that is they are going to compare what are your utility rates to Independence, Silverton, other communities like you, and say, how do you rank in this? Because we're hearing this is a barrier, but that is often urban lore. So we're going to provide you with that data so you're armed with that information. So here is a quick overview of the project process. So as Dan mentioned, we had our stakeholder groups in January, and I'll give you that feedback. So where we are now, we're in task 2. So Mackenzie and then my colleague, Stephen Pedigo, he is out of NYU. We're looking at more of the data analysis. So he's doing further a deep dive regarding the skills barriers to how are you getting Stayton people employed in your local jobs or within the regional area. We're hearing about a mismatch there. So we're doing a deep dive on data analysis there. And so we'll be back probably early, actually probably mid-April, and we'll talk about that with the open house for that. What are those findings? And then task 3 is going to be that final strategy that I mentioned and those specific actions. So it's one thing to have a strategy. How do you get there? So that will be coming probably in June, or will be in June, not probably. So want to give you a quick overview on our world of economic development. So when we talk about economic development, what we mean is what we really want to focus on are what we call traded sector companies. And so these are quick logos to give you a sense of what that means. Why we like traded sector is because they typically are larger employers. They spin off new companies. Often innovation and intellectual property comes out of traded sector. Whereas local sector tends to be smaller. The other critical element of traded sector is they bring money into the region. So Geldwin makes something, sells it, ships it out. That's new money coming into your region. Local sector, such as these, are people where you're spending your money inside your region. You're not bringing new money in. It's more you're spending it within. And there's not innovation or spin-off with local sector. But they're very important because they're amenities that make you a great place. You need a dentist. You need a coffee shop. You need to be able to go grocery shopping somewhere. So they're very critical for your community, but they're not as critical for your tax base and your employment base. And the other big difference between the two, next slide please, is the wages. So as you can see, the bottom two, wages in local sector, what retail and accommodation and food is making, as opposed to if you go up to your traded sector above, you can see how much stronger those wages are within that traded sector area. So as responsible stewards of your public dollars, your best ROI is focusing on traded sector for that reason as well. So those are the reasons why when we talk about economic development, it's generally we want to make sure we have a strong traded sector. And the elements of a traded sector are really these 4 buckets. You need higher education to create that R&D and innovation. You need the industry who's going to grow the businesses and employ people. And the industry needs talent, and then you need infrastructure, and that's really where the city comes to play. Do you have the roads? Do you have clean water? Do you have sites? Do you have broadband? So that's typically where the city needs to play. And one thing that we will do and fleshes out with this action strategy is you can't do it alone. So when we had those stakeholder meetings, we met with the community college. We met with Andy Gardner with the school district. We're meeting with the chamber. So everyone's got different roles, and you don't want to be duplicating efforts. You want to be, especially when you're in a smaller community such as yours, you don't have the resources or the ability to do that. Okay, next slide, please. So this is just highlighting, so Sedcor, who is an excellent partner, I love Nick Harville, he's a great asset. They've already looked at what are your strong industry clusters for your region, right? And so this is a snapshot from their website. And Stayton will fall within these, but in certain areas you're going to do stronger than others. And if you can go to the next slide. So what we can do when we talk about these industry clusters is, you can see over here to the left, it's called a NAICS code, National Association of Industry Classification System. So every company within Stayton and the US has to self-define with these NAICS. And what we can do is categorize the NAICS together and figure out a cluster. So this is an example of your food and beverage cluster. So we take that and then we get data from the business organ, and then the next slide, we can look at what does that visually look like. So this is what your food and beverage manufacturing looks like in Marion County. And you can see Stayton here guess what this big employment dot is. So that's representing NORPAC. But you can see within Marion County how strong your food and beverage industry is. And then you can take this process, and then if you go to the next slide, what's the next one we're looking at? So this is the agriculture, huge agricultural production in Marion County. This is a critical part of your DNA. And then the next slide, I think, is the, forestry, wood products. Interestingly, I love doing forestry and wood products because it's almost always aligned with rail spurs. So that's something, we've heard about that, we will be addressing that. But because it's a big commodity bulk item, it typically wants to be along rail. So that's what we mean by industry clusters, and we'll be studying that further for Stayton. And then national and regional trends we want to touch on. I'm sure you've heard this over and over and over. Skills, skills, skills. And we don't want to just talk about getting a 4-year bachelor's degree. We're talking about career technical education, associate's degree, welding, manufacturing, across the board. People today need skills. It's no longer sufficient to just have a basic high school education across the board. So that is one of the key mantras through this strategy. Next slide. And I think the other key element that's important for economic development, traditionally, in the 80s, the idea was you just need cheap land and cheap utilities, and that is not cutting it anymore. Those are still important elements, but this is what's driving the economy. You need brains behind any type of industry. And so what companies are realizing, and I've talked to companies when I was working in Marion County, there was a manufacturer who left Tualatin to go to cheaper land in Marion County, couldn't get any employees to work at his manufacturing facility. So this is what's driving any type of company. And so with the economic development strategy, yes, we need strong industry, but you need to make this a great place, because these guys can go anywhere. And so they want to know that Stayton is a unique and great place for them to live and their family as well. So next slide, please. So the other element that we talk about is who are you doing this strategy for? So this is a slide from the Brookings Institute, which we've been hearing a lot about. The top 1% is gaining substantially. The bottom 50, this is over since the 70s in terms of pre-tax income. Who are you doing this for? We are saying you should be doing this for the people who already live in Stayton. And how do you increase their opportunities and their access to asset wealth? How do you start raising that lower bar? I'm not worried about the top 1%. What we want to do is start lowering that bottom bar through education and job access. And I think the other important element, also from Brookings, and I'm a big advocate of this, what this is showing is how do you grow those jobs? So economic development, we saw this with Amazon HQ2 and that madness. You do not grow by spending your time trying to woo companies to Stayton. This is a national average of how much job growth and where it's coming from. You're going to get about 3% of that. Woo, we stole them from California, they came here. 11% might be they decide, okay, we're going to open a second office in another city. 86% of your growth comes from the companies already here. So that is your strategy. How do you either encourage innovation, startups, or very most importantly, take care of who you have? So that will be a big emphasis with the strategy as well. Next slide. So those are the big trends in what we're doing, and let me go quickly through. I've got about 5 slides. So this, I think Stephen prepared probably closer to 75 slides that Dan has, if you're a data geek and want to look into it. But some quick trends we're looking at in terms of Stayton's population. You are growing above U.S. average, but we like to put you in context with your peers to give you a sense of what's going on. So a little bit slower than some of your peers at 3.1%. Next slide, please. Good news is your median household, you've had strong 5-year growth within household income. You're still lower than U.S. average and some of your peers, but it's growing. So that's a great positive slide to be looking at. You're young. This is a great asset. Some of the communities we work in are quite old, which doesn't bode well for a great employment, a great base for talent and employment. This was interesting. So your total business establishments, so this is both growth and loss balance out. So over 5 years, you've had minimal 0.4% growth. So this is something we'll want to be looking at. How do you grow your business establishments here? And then next slide. So this is, and then who are those businesses? So as you can see here, what we did was color code them. Many of them are in that local sector that we talked about, and smaller or within traded. So we want to be looking at how do we maybe bolster that manufacturing and those other elements, get that traded sector growing more so. And then the last thing is we're looking at also who's living here, what are the skills living here, and what's really remarkable about you all is the amount of percentage. So this is saying the people who live here, what are their skills? And 20% of your Stayton residents are, have skills in manufacturing. And the next slide shows that this puts you above all of your peers. That's a real asset, but like we said, we're hearing they're not working locally. So that's what Stephen's working on right now, is really digging into what's going on with these manufacturing skills. So that's some of the data we're looking at. And so how does that shape the strategy? We'll be looking at how that shapes the strategy going forward. And then the next slide, please, Dan. So I'll go through community engagement. This is what I normally don't read a slide, but you guys can look at this. And I want you to just, these were the key themes that we took away. So I am going to touch on these. And this is where we'd love to hear feedback from you all and any questions. Like I mentioned in the beginning, I spent the first 8 years of my career in entitlements with commercial development. And what I've seen with Stayton is you seem to be going through growing pains. You've been a very local community. You've worked typically with local developers, and now you have more regional developers coming in. And so there's a friction there because the locals are a little frustrated that things are now becoming more standardized, but that's the way it should be. You should not be ashamed of SDCs. You should not be ashamed of permit fees. Those are good things. That's what we do to make sure people stay safe and you have utilities paid for. So I think you're just going through growing pains. I enjoyed working with staff. I think what's critical is understanding, and we'll answer this question, is how do you compare with other cities so that you have that data so you know where you stand. But what is also important, if you still have SDCs and permits, what's really critical that doesn't cost you anything is a positive culture of proactive problem solving. That is what's really critical for economic development. So the third bullet, wanted to touch on, the city and SEDCOR are getting requests to go look at that industrial area. Businesses want to go there. I think we heard there's probably been 6 to 8 requests, but per the second bullet, once they start hearing about that intersection requirement and the price tag tied to that, they can't stomach it. They can't take it on. How do we remove that barrier? We were really impressed meeting with Superintendent Gardner and the K-12 system and what he is doing with the career technical education. I believe he just got a state grant, CETE revitalization. That is a huge asset for your community and how that's linking with industry. We'll focus on that a bit more. As I mentioned, we're seeing a disconnect between the skilled residents and employers. We're going to vet that out a bit more. We heard clearly you need more diverse housing options for employees. Let me just say, we work across the entire Western United States. Every single community is struggling with affordable housing. You are not unique. And it is frustrating, but if that makes you feel any better, you're not unique. And it's a lot of this providing it's typically smaller units and diverse units for a variety of employees. I think the other interesting element that we heard across the board with all the stakeholders is not a real clear vision. When we asked people, why do they choose to live in Stayton? There wasn't 3 or 4 quick bullets of why are people choosing to live here. So what we really want to do with this economic development strategy is also incorporate is where is Stayton going, and does it want to grow? That's something that we need to answer. And what I love about economic development, because as I worked at City of Vancouver, cities I often see try to do a branding or a tagline or a logo, and it never works well because a city has so many different constituents and personalities and elements, and it becomes very vanilla and very bland. What you do have that sets you apart and is very objective is your industry, right? So you can tie into your economic development assets to really start developing your vision. It's incredible, for example, you have an incredible agricultural roots in Marion County. And so you have innovative manufacturers making blueberry pickers, right? So this is really cool innovation tied to the roots of where you're going. How do you take that agricultural innovation further with drones for fertilization? Or maybe is it within hydrology and irrigating the agricultural lands? That is what we're talking about when we're talking about innovation tied to who you are authentically. We're not saying you change and you start becoming a software hub. That is not authentic to Stayton. We're saying, how do you take what you do really well and move that forward with an innovative economy? That's what we'll be looking at for those genuine connections of how you can do that. And we want the community to understand that. It's not just something that Superintendent Gardner is going to do and your businesses. The whole community needs to understand that as well. And that's what we'll be working on and touching on in this next month with community outreach. So those are some of the questions that we want to be answering, and this is how we plan to be doing it. So we have a project website up, a landing page where people can go. First presentation here to you to set the foundation. I don't know if the press release is going to go out, but we're going to use Our Town and Stayton Mail, let people know that we're going to put a digital survey out March 15th so people can start answering questions about vision, what is it, what do you love? And then we want that open house on April to 18th at the library, and we want the survey before that so we can start gathering that data and input, and we can report that out at the open house to start getting more feedback as well. And then throughout that process, we'll be using the city's social media tools to help promote that, and hopefully with you all, you can help promote that as well. So those are the next steps coming up quickly here for your engagement. So that was my quick presentation, and I know Commissioner Ort was at one of our meetings, so if there's any other questions or comments, I'm happy to take those now.
Mr. Mayor?
That's very nice. Questions? Go ahead, please.
So if you go back to, could you go back to that slide real quick of the preliminary feedback? So you were talking about, you touched on the CTE programs. It was really interesting to me if you could explain a little bit further why that's important for our area and what that means for our, the manufacturing. Yeah. Why those two things are, what we're doing is going to translate into some good things for our community.
Sure. And I think the other acronym I should have put up there, and you need to know if you're not familiar with it, is STEM, science, technology, engineering, math. And so that is the broad catchphrase for what students need to know today. And going forward, if you're going to thrive in a new economy, you have to have those skills in creative thinking and problem solving. So that big umbrella, and I'll even get dorkier on you, it's called STEAM. You throw an A in there, so science, technology, engineering, arts, to make you really cool and creative, and math. So those STEM, STEAM is that big umbrella. And a lot of grants are tied to that. A lot of money is tied to that. So that's why you want to know about that. So within that umbrella, you can go to OSU and become an engineer in wood processing, or you can become a doctor, or you can focus on career technical engineering, which is what we used to call shop class, right? But how do you have those hands-on skills to make things, to machine things with wood, but that translates into 3D printers and reductive laser cutters. So how do you get people out there making things, touching things, and start building things again and problem solving? We lost that in 2000. I hear across the board, a lot of the shop classes, we lost the teachers, we lost the training, we lost that, and then a lot of those shop classes are now tucked away in closets. We're pulling them out, we're bringing them out, and we're adding these added new technologies as well. So you might hear the other element with that is maker space, right? So how do you start making things? And so I was just in the city of Dalles last Friday, and that's what they've done. They have it within their library. You can have it anywhere, but so something for you to tackle, right? So of course it's not big planers in there, but it's the 3D printers and the laser cutters. So and how do you start innovating and thinking of new products and working with industry? And that's how you start taking those courses, putting those courses back into the K-12 so that people value we'll just say those shop classes again, so that they don't have to go to get a 4-year degree. They're going to thrive working back at Red Bill or Geldwin or Lithau or these other companies, and they're going to help those companies thrive by innovating new techniques and process. That's what CT is about. Basically, it's let's own the shop classes again. Let's embrace that again so that our manufacturers have people to hire. Because that's the other element coming. Many of these baby boomers are retiring, and you'll hear the silver tsunami. If they retire with those skills within those traditional manufacturing skill sets, who's going to take their place, right? That's a big concern coming forward.
Ma'am, how much of a concern is it in that same line, that CTE program, how much of it is, for those of us that jump right into this, that we start educating and training our youngsters, but we can't keep them here?
Right.
I mean, that's got to be
Yeah.
a factor in it.
It is, and that's why, especially for a smaller community like yours, more of these, you're not quite rural, but you're a smaller community, it is very hard to recruit. Remember, with the talent thing, right? It's very hard to recruit. So that's why it's even more critical for you to tap into the K-12 as early as possible, so that they love their family here. They have roots in Stayton. They will stay in Stayton. It's going to be much more power. You have to think long term, right? That's a 10 to 20 year play, but it's going to be much more sustainable for you to grow that love here and keep them here. Often what happens, they go, they leave, but once they start having families, they come back. That's what I'm seeing here. I'm seeing that in the Dalles. I'm seeing that in a lot of these smaller rural communities. They want to come back with their families.
Okay, super, thank you. That's wonderful. Other questions for the lady?
Mr. Mayor?
This has been neat. Good. More?
First off, very impressive presentation. I can see the value in this, and I want to thank the city staff for clearly, just from what you've said, they have worked really hard on this, so that's amazing. I don't know, have you guys seen the Salem CTE program that they have there?
Is it the high school?
Yeah, where they actually have like a whole facility that's like a private-public partnership where they do, it's like another school basically, where they bring all these students in, they do their English, their math, their everything in that one facility, and then they have that hands-on in the space. I know that's, a pie-in-the-sky dream, but their graduation rates are in like the 90s. Whereas for the state, they're in more of the 70%. So anyway, this is really cool to see this. I think the thing I love the most is that you guys are going to provide us with actions that we can do, and that is fabulous. And specifically that you're going to have individuals assigned to who's going to complete that, so that you know who is fully responsible for each action. So that's great.
Good.
Thank you
Good.
so much.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah, pleasure.
Mr. Mayor?
Anyone else?
Yes.
Oh, go ahead.
Hey, I was just thinking, Councilor Hook and I were recently at like a regional meeting with Kurt Schrader and the mayor of Monmouth. She works within the school system, and she was talking about a program like it was Grow Your Own. Do you know? It was basically about teachers. So just trying to focus in on teachers and having them kind of like you were saying, invest in the community so that they will come back and then be teachers in the community, kind of like keeping those people, growing your teachers so that they will stay there. Have you heard of anything like that? Or
not specifically for teachers, but we generally call it a boomerang strategy, right? Okay. So, they go, they left, they went, maybe they're in a bigger city, Seattle, so forth, and then you can do specific strategies to get those leaders to come back. That's what a lot of cities are trying to do. Kind of a tangent tied with education. I think what's important, and it'll be interesting talking to Andy Gardner further, as we try to, as we do these STEM programs, makers programs, is not to overburden the teachers. They've already have a lot of burdens, and so that's the fine line. And so again, back to the DALs, putting that maker space in the library as a resource for the teachers to send students to, rather than make some teacher learn how to run a 3D printer, learn how. Those are some of the things we need to think about, is how do you help support the teachers and make it a broader ecosystem across the community, rather than dumping it all on them to take on this important job.
Just one.
You spent some time up in the Dalles, apparently.
It's fresh on my mind. I was there on Friday, so that's why I was there. But yeah, we work all across.
Upwind or downwind of the creosote plant?
Yeah, that just came out on Friday. Yeah.
How does the city deal with something like that?
You know, it's interesting. We didn't touch on that, but again, back to this branding issue. So, so for you all, I don't know if you have a nickname, but their nickname is The Dirty.
The Dirty.
And the old guard thinks it's awful. The millennials think it's awesome. In fact, they named a beer The Dirty, right? And so this ties back to, who are you authentically? What are your roots? And so you can't ever create a brand. You are what you are. And so what we're encouraging the community to do is just own it. You make things. You're dirty. You're manufacturers, but that's who you are. You are not. What they always say is, we're not Hood River. It's like, great, that's great, but what are you? That's my life in Vancouver. We're not Portland. So really owning who you are and looking at the positives is that. And so if you genuinely own the dirty, you say, yeah, we got a creosote plant downtown.
Okay, thank you. Other questions or thoughts? Should we let the lady go for now?
Yeah. So I wanted to just say that it sounds a lot like this career technical stuff it really is similar to the Career Technical Education Center in Salem.
Yes, it is, yeah.
And and it is a 98% graduation rate. I mean, it's really great for students, and
because
this is really like where things are moving, and that's so cool to see that you guys are working on this. I'm really excited to see where this goes.
Good.
Okay.
All right.
Super. Thanks
Thank
very
you.
much.
Mr. Mayor,
Thank
one
you.
more thing.
Oh,
Is
one thing.
is the presentation you've provided us going to be available somewhere for later review?
Yep. I'll give.
Yeah, it's going to get posted on the website.
Okay, perfect, thanks.
Okay. Anything else? 1, 2, 3. Thank you, ma'am.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right. City Housing Rehabilitation Program. This is going to kind of play into what Alyssa was talking. One of the things is everyone's dealing with housing at one level or another. So, Dan?
So, yes, we wanted to just take this opportunity tonight to give the council an update on what the status of the city's housing rehabilitation program is, what we've done and where we are with the new program. You've got a more complete written report. I'm not going to go through it in a lot of detail right now. But basically, starting in 2002 or so, the city received a $250,000 grant. That grant was used to make loans to qualified homeowners to fix up their homes. About 12 or 14 loans were issued, ranging, I think, up to like $12,000 or $15,000. The way that program works is the homeowner does not need to make regular monthly payments on it. The repayment is deferred until such time as the homeowner either sells or refinances their home. The interest is at the current time, the interest rate on loans is 4% simple interest, and it accrues for only a 5-year period. And after that time, interest no longer accrues. The early loans, when they were made, I believe it was a 3% interest rate, and it accrued for only 4 years. Over the past 15, 17 years, a number of those loans have been repaid, and that money is then available to be lent out again. In addition to that, we cooperate with a number of other cities, Marion County, as part of a regional program, and the partners in that program have agreed that if a community has a lot of money available but no demand for it, that money can be lent in another community. And Stayton has had a lot stronger demand than the money we have available. So I know there's been a couple of homeowners here in Stayton that have been able to take advantage of that regional pot of money. So while we may only have like $20,000 available to lend out now, there is actually several $100,000 available to residents in Stayton should there be the demand for that. So that program, again, is loans to homeowners. There is essentially a second mortgage placed on the property, a lien on the property. But what that means is that there are some people who actually own their home, but because they don't own the land that their home sits on, are not eligible to take advantage of that program. So last year, the city partnered with the cities of Mount Angel, Almsville, Turner, and Marion County, submitted an application for a new grant with the express purpose of being able to serve the owners of manufactured housing units that do not own the land that the homes sits on. We were chosen for that grant. It took us quite a while to get through all of the paperwork, environmental reviews, etc. But finally, in October or early November, we received the go-ahead and the funds were released. And at this point in time, we have received 11 applications from homeowners in Stayton, 2 each in Mount Angel and Almsville. 3 projects have already been completed. 2 others are under construction. Of all of the 15 applications, all of them are qualified, and there's no reason none of them will receive the money. And with this pot of money, it is not a loan, it's actually a grant to the owner of the manufactured housing unit of up to $10,000 to do needed repairs. And it's going to the folks in the mobile home parks. There's 3 mobile home parks in the city. I believe that most of them will be up in the Oaks Manor, which is the mobile home park on Golf Club Road. Chances are very good that nobody in the Stayton Mobile Home Park on West Washington Road will be eligible because to be eligible, the unit has to be a post-1976 manufactured housing unit, and I don't think that there's anybody in that West Washington Street Mobile Home Park in what would be considered a newer manufactured housing unit. A good portion of those units are not even manufactured housing units. They're recreational vehicles or motor vehicles that were transformed into a place to live.
1976?
1976 is when the federal government established manufacturing standards for manufactured housing units. And so it has to be a, quote, newer, now, 40-something years old, and no longer new, but it has to be considered it has to have a HUD stamp on it in order to be eligible. So that's the status of what we've been doing. We're always on the lookout for additional funds. I probably on an annual basis, do something either in the city newsletter or otherwise to publicize the availability of funds. We've got these brochures out at City Hall and in our office and elsewhere around town. I occasionally reach out to the clergy in the city and other social service agencies to make sure that they know that these funds are available for income qualified homeowners.
Okay, thank you, Dan. Very good.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
So you were talking, not the manufactured home program, but this program in the brochure. How much money is available right now?
There is several $100,000 available.
Okay. And it's rotating, right? You said, so once it...
Yeah, when it's repaid, it is available to be lent out again. I mean, we still have some of those original loans that are out there, but others have been repaid and new loans made with those funds. And again, there's some other communities around the county or around the region that have had money come back in, and there just isn't the demand.
Follow-up question, Mr. Mayor?
Follow-up questions.
So with this program, do they have to stay in their home for a certain amount of years? Like, do they have to be there for the 5 years?
No. No. I mean, if you took out a loan and then 2 years later, whatever reasons needed to move, you sold your house, you'd repay the loan.
Okay. Other questions?
Mr. Mayor.
Go ahead.
It's more of a comment. I am really excited about this. And I remember we had sat down and talked about the potential of this program a while ago, Dan, and it's really cool to see it come to life and hear kind of how it's gone so far. And I'm even more excited that these sometimes forgotten homeowners are finally getting a little bit of light and opportunity that they have not been afforded in the past. So thank you so much for all the work that you're doing on this.
You are welcome. And yeah, I mean, some of these places, particularly thinking up in the Oaks, those
Yes.
folks are in desperate need of some help, and they're getting it.
Yes, I hope that you feel extremely proud of the work that you're doing.
Yes, I do.
Great.
Okay.
Mr.
Anything
Mayor, I
else?
do have one more question.
One more question. Okay.
I completely agree with everything Paige said. So the program that is for the manufactured home in parks, is that one the same kind of turnover in terms of money, or is it just this grant was just the money and then when it runs out, it runs out?
The latter, because these are grants to the homeowners.
Okay.
So that's money, it was a $400,000 grant. There's about $100,000 has been set aside for contract administration, et cetera. So there'll be about $309,000 is the budget to give out. So that should be about 31 grants if everybody got the maximum of 10,000. And at this point, just in the, it's really just been the past 3 months since we got the notice that the funds were finally available. We've got those 15 applications underway. The agreement among the 4 cities in Marion County is that because Stayton, 1, is the largest community, 2 is the actual, we are the grantee from the state. We're doing all of we're taking the responsibility for grant administration, et cetera, that about 1/3 of the grant amount will be spent in the city of Stayton, more if there isn't the demand in the other communities after 6 months.
Thank you, great job.
Is that it? Okay. Satisfied. All right, thank you, Dan. Let's go on to OLCC annual renewals. Oregon Liquor Control Commission. Big factor in our town. Chief?
Mayor and Council, you have the report from the OLCC, and every year they they send out the licensing requirements for the liquor establishments in the community, and it's our job as the police department to review those and make sure that they're falling within the parameters they're supposed to be in, and then we send that back to OLCC. In the past, it's gone before the council. It's not really needed if they are all falling within the guidelines that they need to, and so this is just an informational report to let you know that they are doing what they're supposed to be doing. We have 25 different establishments. There's 26 on the list here. One of them is under 2 different categories. The categories are off-premise sales, full on-premise sales, and limited sales. So.
Mayor, I have a quick question. I think I know the answer,
Please,
but
go ahead.
what kind of things would prompt a denial, and have we ever denied?
We've never denied one, but we have sent them back. Actually, we never denied them during the annual reviews as long as I've been here. But we have sent them back for review with to OLCC when they bump out of compliance. There's a listing from the state, set by state statute in the OARs on the different things that we can look at. There's going to be so many assaults that they can have at an establishment, so many over-service complaints, so many MIPs that they can get that comes out of one of them. There's a whole list of different requirements that fall into that. Usually when we call the OLCC during the middle of the year for one of them, they just put sanctions on them. And tell them they can. We had one establishment here several years ago that's no longer here, where they said that they weren't allowed to sell after midnight. They couldn't sell all the way up to 2 o'clock. And then they'll do spot checks on them.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chief. Any questions or thoughts on that? No?
I just have one, Mr. Mayor. I think I read in here that OLCC found that it wasn't really, that the council didn't really even need to make decisions on this anymore. So I see that it is informational, but we don't need to ever have in-depth on this, right? We just have to have a piece of paper. Do we need to talk about it at a meeting in the future, or can we just have it as a, hey, this is the report, read it if you're interested, but overall everyone was approved?
That's the way it works. The OLCC is they give cities the opportunity to approve or to deny, and if you don't do anything, they don't come after you and say, where's your approval? They just automatically approve unless a city jumps up and says, hey, there's an issue here. And so there's really no need to approve. There's a lot of cities that don't do anything with it unless there's a problem. And that's basically what we're doing now, is we're switching over to that because it really doesn't matter. A lot of times because of the timing, it's difficult because the timing, the licensing is required. They're required to do their updates by the end of March, but OLCC wants an answer to you by the 1st of March from the city if you're going to deny anybody. And so if you don't have all of those license renewals returned back, there's not a really good way to send it. And so there's kind of a month gap, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I feel like maybe I wasn't clear. Next year, do we need to have this on an agenda? Or can we just use our time more effectively working on something else and just keep this transparent on the website that they've been working so hard on to provide data?
I think bringing it forward was more just to let you know the change.
Awesome.
Was really what it is. And I think, yeah.
Cool.
And new applications would still come to the council. It's just the renewals.
Great.
So.
Anyone's fired up, there's an opportunity here, anyone's fired up about the evils of Devil Rum, certainly a chance to take off on that, but if not, we'll move along. And thank you, Chief. No staff commission reports, presentations, comments from the public? Business from the city manager?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. There is something I wanted to touch on, and it was based off the presentation of Alyssa, which was 5 years ago when I started with the city. I met with Sedcor and with Nick Harville, who had been working on a project for quite a while, and a pretty ambitious project. And what Nick had discovered was there was a gap in terms of the skill sets of the workforce and what manufacturers and trade sector businesses needed. And so Nick had created a task force where he had brought together these stakeholders and had determined programs and processes in terms of looking for a secondary diploma, if you will, for high school students. So not just your high school diploma, but a diploma that would show a basic skill set in some of these, as they kind of said in the past, jobs in the past that have specific skill sets and jobs and abilities. And Nick started going to the local schools to work with the programs to, as she talked about, to get these programs restarted, where in the past, in the metal shop had gone away and the wood shop had gone away in some of these fabrications. And Nick had talked a little bit about some of the struggles he had in terms of high schools were always geared towards college, and what about these students that maybe college isn't the best, and let's get them a skill set. And Nick's goal was very much to get that secondary diploma that you could then take to a manufacturing business or a trade sector business and show, I have the skill set to come in here and have the basic skills to do the jobs you're going to need. It was an ambitious plan, and I enjoyed hearing his passion, but it was recognizing a need in terms of SEDCOR and then working. And I know he worked really hard. So she mentioned tonight how excited she was the local schools were part of that, but I just wanted to say sometimes behind the scenes, some of the really hard work, and Nick spent a lot of time and energy and blood, sweat, and tears. And I was privy to a lot of those conversations and just wanted to give him credit. And it's exciting to hear that program continues to move forward, and hopefully it will help the workforce in the future. So I just wanted to share that story because I thought it was an interesting story coming back from my time first starting here with the city, and wanted to give Nick credit because he really was a big, huge driving factor in that, and an ambitious plan. And it's kind of exciting to see it succeeded. And Nick would probably be embarrassed of calling him out, so don't tell him I said this. That's all I have, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you. All I've got this evening is a welcome home to Mr. Ryan Stevens from China. An adventure unlike most of your peers will ever have, but I guess that was something. I'm impressed. I became proficient in Mandarin Chinese in 6 months? No, not at all. But got by. You were there, what, 6 months, Ryan? Almost, okay.
Great.
And then came home, okay. But welcome home. Business from the council, anything? Anything? Then future agenda items for March 18th are council rules, public hearing on code amendments, Village Creek parking, water treatment plant sand filter replacement award of bid, and city council goals. This water thing is going to come up again and again, and for the next several years. We are going to have to be planning for whatever the Corps of Engineers does or doesn't do, and things that will affect water quantities and qualities in this valley. So, watershed. So that's what's going on there. Anything else tonight?
Mr. Mayor.
Go ahead.
Sorry, just you brought up the water. Jordan and I had both gone to meet with the community leaders with Kurt Schrader, Congressman Kurt Schrader, and he had mentioned something about that they may be leaning more towards actually like not draining the dam at this point, which I thought was kind of cool.
I sent you an exciting email where we had said that, since you're saying that, I'll go on the record here, which is, and I have no insider information, I haven't had an off-the-record conversation, but based off the meetings we've had and based off the conversations we've had and just reading the tea leaves a little bit, that would be my anticipation. I think the thing from staff that we're now more concerned about going forward isn't that, it's going to be the reallocation of water rights during times when the situation is tight, and Congressman Schrader talked about that He continuously mentioned the need to collaborate, the need to think outside the box, and the understanding that every party was going to suffer equally. So manufacturers, municipalities, wildlife, farmers. And so I think that's going to be the big issue. We're going to wait for the report, which is coming out. We've been told late May or early June. One of the information from the meeting that Lance and I went to last said late May, but at some point, but I would anticipate they're going to have a workaround that will not cause a drawdown, but that's going to lead to other discussion about future water rates.
Okay, is there anything else this evening? If not, we're done.